Well, hey there. It's Thursday. It's time for 3 Minute Thursday. I'm Terry Sawchuk from Sawchuk Wealth. So just looking at the S&P, actually this is the NASDAQ here. The NASDAQ looks a little bit different than the S&P. I would say it's still a bullish formation in that we kind of had this little triangle pattern here. The NASDAQ kind of broke out to the upside, came down a little bit, and is still pushing higher. So it looks like it's going to want to, there's no guarantee that it will, but it looks like it kind of wants to push back up to the previous high and see whether it forms like a double top and comes back down or whether it keeps going higher. If you just take a step back away from looking at the technicals and you just think about kind of how the bigger economic data picture is looking, we're heading into the fourth quarter, so we're going to start to get third quarter earnings, and I think the expectations were ratcheted down. So it's more likely that the companies are going to exceed their earnings expectations because they were lowered, right? They weren't as optimistic about that. So that's probably a bullish setup. I would argue that the inflation numbers, they're still, on a relative basis, they're still high because they've compounded for a number of years off the bottom and COVID. But there's, it's slowing down. The rate of increase is slowing down, I guess I should say. So I don't think inflation. First of all, I just don't. I don't think at this moment the numbers are going to scare the market. Now, I do think what's going to happen is that we're going to see it resurge, pretty strongly next year, and so we'll have to deal with that when it comes. Oil prices. Just a quick peek here. The last I looked, I think oil was around $74 a barrel. Yeah, it's $75.64 now. So when it gets up to 80, it starts to become a bit of an issue for the economy. We're not quite there yet, but we're certainly on the way. What's going on in the Middle East probably isn't helping. And if the economy stays, relatively strong, then it's probably going to push oil prices higher, especially if we, maintain easy monetary policy. So I think that's going to be a resurgence of inflation. And again, that's going to happen probably more next year. And we'll have to deal with that when we get there. But for the time being, I think the market setup looks a little bit more positive. Now, having said that, I still think that we're at risk for a short-term when I say at risk, I don't mean it's imminent. I just mean it's a possibility that on a short-term basis we could see a little bit more volatility, and then probably after the election, typically the market kind of pushes higher through the end of the year. So, I don't expect this to be a straight line up. There is going to be, I think, some potential bumpiness. The reality is that there aren't really any significant bearish catalysts that I can see right at this moment. I think there's some short-term stuff that could, weave its way into the markets over the next couple of weeks. But by and large, through the end of the year, we're still relatively bullish. And if you look on a chart at the S&P 500, this chart actually looks a little better than the NASDAQ in that we broke the previous all-time high. So now we're basically right at the all-time high. And I think, this chart looks a little more constructive, a little more bullish because we already pushed through this all-time high. So, naturally 6,000 kind of looks like a magnet. It seems like the market would want to push a couple hundred points higher. So we may get there before the end of the year. I would not be surprised. I wouldn't be surprised if we don't, but I wouldn't be surprised if we did. And the current structure suggests that it's bullish, right? So you had this drop here, then you have another increase here. This increase here is higher than this increase. This low is higher than this low. So you've got higher high, higher low. That market structure is positive. The fact that we broke out of this triangle, kind of dipped a little bit and started going back up, this looks a little bit like a retest. It doesn't always have to get right down to the bottom and touch this actual triangle here, but just kind of that pattern of going down and then coming back up, that tends to be a little bit more bullish. So again, I think where we're at is market structure looks relatively positive. Might be some short-term volatility, but there's nothing that I see at this moment that says that there's going to be any real significant problems before the end of the year. So I hope that helps you understand where everything's at. Have an awesome weekend, and I will talk to you next week.